story, as I walked with it, believe it or not, or maybe you will believe it, the first thing that came to my mind was Stephen Sondheim's lyric from Into the Woods. How do you say to your child in the night, nothing's all black and nothing's all white? How do you say it will all be all right when you know that it might not be true? What do? Careful of the things you say, children will listen. Children, careful of the things you do. Children will see and learn. Children may not obey, but children will listen. Children will look to you for which way to turn, to learn, to be careful before you say, listen to me. I cannot help but wonder what this strange request did to this young girl. I wonder if she even had a concept of what she asked for. We don't know, for she's not mentioned again. Now Herod, on the other hand, we hear a lot of it. One commentator reminds us that Mark chose this opportunity after Jesus sent out his disciples on their first formal mission to report the death of John the Baptist. Mark hinted at this political death earlier in the story when John was arrested in 1:14, but saved the full report until chapter 6. Now, interpreters who choose to think that Jesus' life and mission were disconnected from social political affairs of his first century context must view this account of John's death by Herod as an aside. Using intercalation, which is what we call a Markan sandwich. Mark is famous for taking a story, beginning it here, putting a story here, and finishing this story over here. Mark placed this account between the commission and the return of the disciples to intimate its significance for the expansion of Jesus' mission. Mark is intentional of putting this message in between the moment Jesus sends out his disciples 2 by 2 and before they return. Now, this translation is a little weak on just how Herod enjoyed the company of John. And Nicholas King's direct translation in the Bible says this about Herod and Herodias. And Herodias had it in for him, John the Baptist, and wanted to kill him. And she couldn't, for Herod was afraid of John, knowing him as a just man and a saint. And he protected him, and when he was listening to him, he was greatly puzzled. And he used to listen to him gladly. Kind of reminds me of some of the college professors I had that would talk way up here, drive me nuts trying to figure out what they were saying. Had to go back and read or reread whatever I was supposed to read before because I still didn't get it. But I was intent on listening to them because I enjoyed the way they talked. Now that vision is a little bit more of a gentler, kinder image of Herod. He actually enjoyed being puzzled by John's teaching, and he truly did want to protect him as best as he could. Now, Herodias, Philip's ex-wife and now wife to Herod, seems to be the point of contention. She is one who doesn't like John's objections to the marriage and plots to be rid of him. And she sees the opportunity with Herod's birthday party. So she gets her daughter to dance for Herod. Her daughter becomes famous for her dance. Now, who knows what's the name of Herod's daughter?
Salome.
Where does it say that in the Bible?
Oscar Wilde.
Actually, it's Josephus. The historian mentions her name is Salome. What was the dance, though?
Seven Veils, Oscar Wilde.
That is Oscar Wilde. It's interesting how tradition and fantasies somehow merge into our cultural context sometimes. So we actually think her name is Salome according to Josephus. According to the Bible, it's actually the same name as her mother, Herodias. And this dance of the seven veils, I don't know. We don't know. It might have been a simple little girl trying to impress her daddy. Over the centuries, there was more legend than anything substantial around the dance. So what was Herod's fear all about? A commentator says, he could not have been happy with John's judgment against his adultery, yet there is no evidence that Herod repented. But we are told that Herod knew John to be righteous and a holy man, and Herod liked to listen to him. Was he like we are sometimes, sensing a hard truth about our lives, uneasy but not ready to accept it? Why risk offending God by harming John? He could be a true prophet after all. Or was it fear, as the ancient historian Josephus claimed, that the power of John's message might stir a rebellion? Herod was not loved by all. His more zealous enemies considered him a collaborator with Rome. Herod was really a small-time ruler, not actually a king, and he was beholden to Rome and vulnerable at home. As the drama played out, he was vulnerable to his wife as well, beguiled by his daughter's dancing and its effect on his guests. Herod makes a rash and quick promise. And Herodias leverages his need to appear resolute in front of his politically important guests to get her wish. John is beheaded. Conflicted with himself about John's message, but surrounded by a manifold of political and family pressures, Herod does what he knows is terribly wrong. And he does say he is deeply grieved. Herod is deeply grieved, as are John's followers, as I would imagine John's family, which includes Jesus. John, a voice crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight the paths for him. John, we celebrate as this wild, uncontrollable spirit that comes out of the dangerous wild places, proclaiming one baptism and a forgiveness of repentance and a forgiveness of sins. John is the one who points past himself. A lesson for all of us preachers and teachers. John proclaims, the stronger one than me is coming. The stronger one than me is coming after me, of whom I am not worthy to stoop down and untie his sandals. Jesus is baptized, the heavens open, the Holy Spirit as a dove descends upon him, and a voice is heard saying, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. Then Jesus is hurled out into the desert. And it is after John has been handed over to Herod that Jesus returns and starts his ministry. John starts the Jesus story. Whether it be a baptism or by a simple stirring in a mother's womb, depending which gospel you're reading, we have no Jesus story without John. I mean, we could have had one, sure. Jesus might have still had a great ministry and a message without John, yet John is essential to this story now. John is our sacred text, our sacred story. So yes, we grieve the loss of John. But we do not celebrate how he died or even why, for that's a bit confusing. But we celebrate the life he lived, the wild man in the desert telling us to make ready the way for the Lord. Just as much as Herod is part of our sacred text and the best of storytelling, anytime we see or hear Herod's name, we have this instinct that we want to boo or hiss. Herod is a villain, and yet in the circumstances that play out, is he a villain or is he trapped by his own circumstances? Remember, Herod makes a rash promise. Herodias leverages his need to appear resolute in front of his politically important guests to get her wish. So is he a patsy? Or is he some political parable in the midst of all of this? One commenter points out that it is tempting to see Herod, a parable that speaks to leadership in government or economic and institutional life in our own time. Persons in positions of power are subjected to the powers and the pressures that pose to threat their own security. Personal pride, greed for gain and prestige, and the influence of ambitious intimates can also play a role. Under the sway of these encroaching forces, the courage to serve truth and the common good can flag. The result may not be as gruesome as John's execution, but the damage can be even more extensive. Even exemplary leaders who are devoted to the welfare of those dependent upon them frequently find themselves mired in a morass of conflicting forces that stymie their best efforts. Certainly there are prophetic voices like John's today also, yet the impact often seems minimal. When wealthy interests can now influence elections by giving anonymous to nonprofit social welfare organizations, citizens with such economic power, without such economic power, might wonder if their needs are being served. Indeed, one can feel a bit like the Baptist disciples. Nothing left to do but bury the body. But we are called to be more resolved. We are called to be invested in this life. We are called to, as disciples of Christ, to stand in the face of such opposition and call it out as what it is. We are called to be the faces of hope. The faces of hope beyond hope. So why does Mark tell the story, the longest of the Gospel's anecdotes, and it's only a flashback? Aside from Golgotha plot and the discovery of the empty tomb, this is the only tale in which Jesus doesn't appear. And in Mark's Gospel, its villains never reappear. It's a strange story about John in which the baptizer himself never even appears. And even stranger, beneath the story of John is the story of Jesus. The flash back is a flash forward. Mark tips us off, and King Herod heard, for his name had become known, and he said, John the Baptizer has risen from the dead. And these are the reasons the miracles are at work in him. That fellow I decapitated, John, he has risen. In this turn of events, Herod is foreshadowing Pilate. In the same way that John is foretold of Herod, Pilate is amazed by circumstances surrounding an innocent prisoner, swept up in events that fast spin out of his control and unable to back down after being publicly outmaneuvered. Like John, Jesus is passive in his final hours and is executed by hideous capital punishment, seemingly dying in order to placate those in control, those he has offended. Now, I'm wondering how I might tie this into this day. Behind the political comment earlier, I was looking through the commentaries, and I was wondering what would tie this into some of the things that are happening, especially around the children, since I opened with children will listen. And I found one commentator that actually brought me to tears. And I'm not going to share all of his commentaries, it's extensive, but I'm going to share you the last part of it. It's connecting to the present times. One such story from today's headlines goes like this. When he landed in Michigan in late May, all the weary little boy carried was a trash bag stuffed with dirty clothes from his days-long trek across Mexico, and 2 small pieces of paper, one a stick figure drawing of his family from Honduras, the other a sketch of his father, who had been arrested and led away after they arrived at the United States border in El Paso. An American government escort handed over the 5-year-old child, identified on his travel documents as Jose, to the American woman whose family was entrusted with caring for him. He refused to take her hand. He did not cry. He was silent on the ride home. The first few nights he cried himself to sleep. Then it turned into just moaning and moaning, said Janice, his foster mother. He recently slept through the night for the first time, though he still insists on tucking the family picture under his pillow. Since his arrival in Michigan, family members said, a day has not gone by when the boy has failed to ask in Spanish, when will I see my papa? They tell him the truth. They don't know. No one knows. Jose's father is in detention, and parent and child until this week had not spoken since they were taken into the custody of the United States authorities. He refused to shed the clothes he had arrived in, an oversized yellow t-shirt, navy blue sweatpants, and gray fleece pullover, likely given to him by the authorities who processed him in Texas. The commenter writes, I, Claudio, have a 6-year-old boy, and I am an immigrant citizen, foreign and citizen at the same time. I could not read this biblical story of John the Baptist without thinking of stories like Jose and the loss of his father. To have Jose separated from his father is like having one's head cut off. The story told in Mark 6 has no redemption. John the Baptist had his head cut off. That is how hundreds of families are now living, with their heads cut off. Parents without children and children without parents. If John announced the coming of Jesus Christ, these kids and parents announced the horrendous cruelty of the immigration policies of this country. On behalf of these families, we must stand up like John the Baptist, who told the government of his day, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Just as Jesus came in the footsteps of John the Baptist, we must show up as Jesus Christ to these families. We must show up like Christ, just as John started a ministry and Jesus came in fulfillment, and yet not completion, for you see the ministry goes on. The apostles stepped up, the disciples stepped up, and we are recalled again and again to step up as Christ, to keep this ministry going. We are called to be Christ to our immigrant brothers and sisters. We are called to be Christ to our homeless brothers and sisters. We are called to be Christ to those suffering from illness. We are called to be Christ to each other, anytime and all the time. If not us, then who? We are the United Church of Christ, a uniting church living to make this place heaven on earth for all. And sometimes that uniting part is the work we have to do, because there is so much division and so much pain at this time. So I leave this sermon as I began. How do you say to your child in the night, nothing's all black, but then nothing's all white? How do you say it will be all right when you know that it might not be true? What do you do? Careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the things you do, because children will see and learn. Amen.